All right, you're live. Go ahead. What? Do you want me to introduce it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're the host, so you know.
I'm the host. I thought you were going to be the host today.
Well, I'm an interviewer, and maybe not necessarily the host. I was going to allow you to do your introduction.
I go, this is great. This is the Something Adventure podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I'm normally your host on this podcast in which we explore Silicon Valley, but one of my guests, Eric Hall, suggested that he could come and interview me, and I thought, wow, that sounds like a fascinating subject to me. And so I agreed. So without further ado, here's Eric.
Thank you. So, you started this podcast and, people are listening a little bit more and more.
Yeah.
And, at some point you have to reveal who you are. At this
Right.
point, you've maybe gotten a couple little snippets here and there, right? Of, kind of what your vision is and what your impetus was behind the podcast. But, if we were to kind of flip the tables, Freaky Friday, as you call it.
Exactly. It's a Thursday for full disclosure. I do not want to go to a podcast court, but yes.
So
Freaky Friday.
So if we flip the tables and start from scratch, we have someone who started this podcast who's really kind of dedicated and looking for ways to express themselves.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's your story? Like, how did this all start? Like, first question, where were you born? Where were you from? And what was that
So
like?
I grew up, when I was really little, I was in the Midwest. And later went to school at Northwestern. Actually grew up in when I was really little in Illinois. And then moved to La Jolla, California when we were young.
And so where's La Jolla?
It's in
Not
San
being
Diego.
a native
It's in
California.
San Diego. It's just freaking lovely. It's on the beach. It's beautiful. It's relatively wealthy. And it was just fabulous. It's just this sunny. I think it's sunny like 340 days out of the year. It was when I was there. I think it was the time when they had goths. Remember goths? There are no freaking goths in law. Like people dressed up in black a couple times. They're like, fuck it. It's too nice out. Like I'm not that depressed.
It's too hot for a trench coat, is what you're saying.
It's just too lovely to be depressed.
Bangs.
Yeah. Robin Wright went to school with me, and Jeff Jacobs, whose dad founded Qualcomm and went on.
Oh.
It was lovely. It was great.
Yeah.
And, from La Jolla High, I went to Northwestern, where I went to school with. I have these weird brushes with fame, but they're not very good brushes.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't make friends. Like, David Schwimmer was in my fraternity, and Stephen Colbert
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
was at Northwestern with me. I do not, and I wish I had a story.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, dude, he was in our dorm. He was like that guy. I can't even fake like I remember that guy they were talking about. But
I could see him being a very low-key college student myself.
yeah, I guess he did. Like he did theater, of course, and he did we had Meow in Northwestern Wildcats. That was the comedy improv troupe. But yeah, never. And then now years later, of course, I mean,
He did Second City. I believe he did.
Yeah, it would make sense.
Yeah.
But he was in the wilderness for a while. Yeah, you didn't hear about him until maybe 15 or 20 years went by before you heard of that guy.
So back up though. We got to get back to high school.
Sure.
So the high school experience, your high school experience. Knowing you now, I know you as kind of an academic, I would say, just from what I know of you.
Yeah.
So was your high school experience, was it primarily academic? Did you have a sports lifestyle popularity thing or not?
La Jolla, it was fabulous. La Jolla High is so one of the best surfing beaches in the world is called Wind and Sea Beach. La Jolla High is about 3 blocks away from that beach. It's an open campus. So for those, in 2 ways. So for those, if you didn't go to school in California,
Which I did not.
these Southern California schools, literally, they're open. Like the doors, your classrooms open onto outside.
I've seen Teen Wolf.
Yeah, right. So you like, oh, okay, I'm walking out the door of my class. I'm now on lawn, like I'm on grass. So it was open that way, and then it was open campus. Like if you weren't in class, just go, do
Smoke somewhere.
yeah, whatever.
In a bush.
We would drink, but yeah. So I didn't learn shit. I mean, this was the period. This was what, like the 80s.
Yeah, give me some years here. Give me some
Yeah,
years.
it was like the
reference.
early 80s. So this
Okay.
was like when, your English teacher would be some cool dude who just like played movies. We're watching Apocalypse Now in English class. I didn't learn shit. It was super fun though. By the time when I got to college, all these East Coast kids had gone to these prep schools.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, and then these prep schools, they expect you to know. They're right. They say them like you're supposed to know. Like, I went to Choate. And you're like, Okay, I went to La Jolla High. Is that okay? Your thing's a thing, my thing's a thing.
Right.
But they clearly read a lot more books than I had. I was,
so is that like a testament for California education right there?
I don't know, man. It was pretty fun. It was pretty fun. Jeff, found Qualcomm's doing okay.
Yeah.
And Robin Wright's doing okay, and everyone I know from they all went to Princeton and places like that.
So you'd say your primary academic experience came after high school, then? Really, in the college years.
I got to say. And then they had like independent study classes, which meant you just didn't have to fucking show up.
Right.
It was great. It was like, but I meet people like, high school is the dark years. Or I'm like, I don't know, man. La Jolla High is pretty fun. It was pretty great.
So undergrad was where? Northwestern.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Okay.
Great school. Like, I was in a fraternity. That was fantastic. It was fun. Northwestern's like a little bit of, it's a Big Ten school.
Yeah.
But it's also like private. It's kind of near Chicago, which is cool. It's not in the suburb, but it's kind of in the suburb. It's like, it's on a lake. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the Big Ten.
I'm a fellow Big Ten alumni as well.
That's where, so when I was there, if you follow Big Ten football, I was, it was the losingest, Northwestern at the time had the losingest streak in college NCAA history.
I do remember
my entire freshman year, they didn't win a football game. But what's funny is, so Northwestern, so every few years, so Northwestern's in the Big Ten. And what that means is Northwestern, even in these losing years, they get 1/10 of the TV revenue.
Yeah.
They get 1/2 of the gate when they go play at Michigan or whatever. And so every few years it would come up, Northwestern, big vote, maybe they'll be in the Ivy Leagues, join the Ivy Leagues. And the trustees of Northwestern, kind of being no dummies, would kind of go, the Ivy League is kind of prestigious, but you know what else is prestigious? 1/10 of that Big Ten TV revenue.
Yeah.
We'll stay right here. Thank you very much. And then I think we won our first game like sometime by middle of my sophomore year. And I think since then, Columbia, FYI, has the record for the most NCAA losses, I believe. Yeah,
So college then, what was your academic experience? Did you enter with a vision, with a plan?
Yeah, not really. Economics, it's a liberal arts school. So it was all like economic. It was just liberal arts, just a mismatch. It was great. It was fantastic.
But so economics was what you picked?
That, in the 80s, what you were doing is you wanted to be an investment banker. That was the thing.
Yeah, Wall Street.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be an investment banker.
Greed is good.
And then economics was like the closest thing, which is funny because the study of economics, you're like, I don't want to be an investment banker. And you're studying like, here's how the indigenous people of Chile formed early economic society. Like, you actually learn interesting shit that really has nothing to do with Wall Street. You just get a liberal arts education, and that's probably just good for you. Right?
Yeah. So all I remember is it's like never-ending graphs of supply and demand.
Yeah.
That I never still somehow made sense.
And now I wish I could go back. Well, I went to MBA school later, and then loved that stuff later. But at the time, I was like, what?
Yeah. Where's the application?
Yeah, exactly. And there is no application for a lot of that stuff. I mean, you're right. Like, unless you become an economist, people do work for the Fed.
Yeah,
it happens. Course. But it was fantastic. It was great.
So, undergrad Northwestern.
Yeah.
But then you continued on, correct? At Northwestern.
I went to Kellogg. This was like in the 90s now, like early 90s, something like that. And I was really young. Like, usually you work before you go to MBA school. Like 10 years. Like, you have experience.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah,
and I'd worked for like 1 year. And so, but I'd done some nonprofit stuff. So I had this strategy. There was like a list of the top schools, like number 1, whatever, two. And Northwestern was ranked number 1 that year. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to like the number 1 school this year, and then the number school the next year. Like right. Eventually, I'll have so much experience, and the schools will be so shitty that I'll get in, like to some business school. And I just got in the first time. So I went to Northwestern.
Top choice, first application.
Yeah, only one application. Yeah. So
did you? I assume you were fairly high in the top of your class out of Northwestern.
No, I was in there.
Was it a GMAT?
Well,
was it a GMAT thing for you? Did you nail it?
I did well in the GMAT, but it's more. I think it was that I think they probably got they get 1 billion people. I worked at Goldman Sachs for 2 years, and I was like, I worked at this weird community bank thing, and I was actually on the board of their nonprofit foundation. Yeah. And they're like, okay, because there are guys there who were like running a clown school in Canada. There were
That's interesting.
A group of physicians from like somewhere in Europe. They want to learn how to build a business. So they take their allotment of the dudes who worked at Goldman Sachs or whatever, and the rest of it's like, all right, let's find something interesting. But the business school trick, if admissions, is you're trying to bring in people who will become wealthy later in life and give you money. Like that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And academic success is not correlated with business success. It is correlated with law school success. It is not correlated with business success.
Similar,
business success is they know this. So that's why you work for a number of years. It's correlated with whatever it is, sales ability. And
well, the first thing that came to mind is a Heisman Trophy winner does not necessarily become a great NFL player.
Yeah, exactly. People who are good academically do well in law school. It's uncorrelated with success and generally with success in business school, which makes sense, right? The guys who succeed in business, they come from poor families a lot. They work hard. They're persuasive. Like they're not necessarily familiar with the early works of Kierkegaard or whatever it is.
So was there a particular curriculum in the business school that you kind of attached to or grappled onto and came out of just a standard
finance and marketing? Yeah, it's a market. They call it a marketing school, but it's not like I was outstripping the finance professors with my vast finance knowledge. So I majored in finance and marketing, basically.
So not only taking 1 year between undergrad and graduate, then you're out of business school. You're 25, 26, fresh-faced kid.
Yeah, younger than that,
What next? And what happened?
Left Chicago. Chicago's fantastic, by the way.
But 10 years at this point, probably 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, so it'd been like 4 undergrad, 1, and then 2, whatever the hell it was. Yeah, didn't even go to my graduation. Not that graduation's the thing in business school. I just got my car and drove to San Francisco, where I moved promptly to the beach because I had friends living on the beach, which I grew up in San Diego. So I'm like, the beach, man, so cheap.
Yeah,
beach in San Francisco. The beach in San Francisco is a very cold, windy place. It is not the beach in San Diego here in San Francisco for sure. So that's how I got to San Francisco, and I don't know, just got a job at Deloitte & Touche in consulting, which was the thing back at the day, and did that for the next 7 or 8 years. Basically.
So this would have been like early 90s for you then? Late 80s?
Yeah, like 93, 94.
Okay.
And then worked at Deloitte up until like 99, basically.
So how did, this might seem silly. I'm a little bit younger than you, but, today's day and age, you think about, how'd you get the job? It's like, well, I went to dice.com and monster.com. Oh, yeah. What was the thing back then?
Submitted resumes.
Yeah. Via mail.
Yeah,
right?
Via mail. Yeah, there's no email yet.
Right. You mail a resume.
Yeah, you'd mail resumes and give, but it was still networking. Like I gave my resume to somebody, and then at one firm, and then she took it to her boyfriend at this competing firm, and I interviewed the competing firm, which was Deloitte, and I got the job. So I think I only interviewed for one job, too. I've never really interviewed for a job other than that one.
That one job?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. Yeah. I mean, when I was a lifeguard, I guess I interviewed for that.
So this is your second interview right now?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with it, I have to admit.
So Deloitte, you came in as, what was your title? Do you remember your first title?
It's like the classic, you're like an associate, then you're senior associate, then you're a manager, then you're senior manager, then you're like a partner. And the partner's the whole equity thing. And I opted not to do that. But if you do that, you need to really commit and be there for 5 to 6 years. But meanwhile, in San Francisco, the .com thing was taking off. It was 1999. People were becoming rich. The future was being created.
Right.
And as a advisor to those companies, which is what Deloitte & Touche did, you kind of look at them and go, oh, what they're doing seems really interesting. And I mean, aside from the fact that, some of them get incredibly wealthy doing it.
Right.
You just looked at these people who were A, getting incredibly wealthy, and B, doing really interesting things like at eBay. And in meeting them at Deloitte & Touche, you would kind of draw the conclusion that, they're not different from me. Like, they're not smarter, better. They welcome to life, but they just did it. They just went out and did it.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine was starting a company, and I just started helping out, which it's happened to me a few times. Just started helping them out, and all of a sudden, it was a company, and it was funded, and I was walking into my boss's office at Deloitte and saying, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go follow that crazy Silicon Valley, just like the gold miners back in the day. I'm leaving my job in New York. I'm getting on a bus, and they weren't getting on buses. I'm getting on a boat, sailing around.
But if you step back a little bit, this kind of came to mind.
Yeah.
You and I talked before about this track. You go to business school. Yeah. You go to Goldman Sachs. You go to Wall Street. Yeah. You follow this very distinct kind of delineated path.
Yeah.
If we reflect on this, it makes me think that the .com, the very first .com that hit, right, 98, 99, that was really economically the first time a lot of people kind of went, wait, that's not what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
not the first time. I mean, I think of the early Silicon Valley semiconductor industry. That was really the first.
Yeah.
But there's this other track, like you weren't in people who weren't engineers. You weren't really necessarily making a tangible
That was
good.
it. The world opened up and you were like, oh, because before that, I'd always been a fan of like entrepreneur, like the old entrepreneurs, like whatever you think of them, but like, the Gettys and the guy, Ford and like those guys. And then Steve Jobs, I thought was the coolest freaking thing. And so I've been a fan of those guys, but I never thought I could actually do it. Like I never was like, wow, Steve Jobs in his garage and then built the thing and the other thing. I was like, I don't think it was very similar to like, I can't start a rock band. Like, I don't think I'm going to be the next, Nirvana.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I'm not going to be a doctor and I'm not going to be like an astronaut, and I'm not going to be Steve Jobs. I'm still not going to be Steve Jobs. So I'm not going to start a company like that. And then all of a sudden you meet people who start companies. You're like, that guy's kind of an idiot. He started a company. Like, if he can do it, I can actually do it. And then of course it's way harder than you ever think.
Yeah.
But you take the leap and then all of a sudden you're doing a new thing. Like so many things.
But it's like, I guess the parallel I was drawing is in a sense that the internet and computers and data opened up the opportunity for non-engineer types to manipulate and to extract and to explain data and to take a whole new approach to business.
Because the internet wasn't, there was a large tract of it that wasn't essentially an engineering function. It was the engineering function had been accomplished, and now it's like, well, what can you do if everybody in the world can communicate freely on this platform? And that's where, eBay came from, for example. And eBay, at the time when they started, it wasn't really clear that was okay. Right? Like, wait, commerce on the internet, this is a nonprofit thing.
Interstate commerce, there are rules you're breaking.
Right, you shouldn't be doing this. So that was the thing. But there's the patron saint of lucky people is Jeff Skoll, who's the guy who went and worked for Piero Midyar for a year at eBay and became like a billionaire. In fact, I have a friend who went to Bain instead of going to work for him. Classic Silicon Valley story. But like the whole world was opening up, and I think, man, geography is destiny, right? Like it was happening here. Like this was the capital city. Right. The world was changing. Maybe there's a .com crash, but you can communicate with anyone in the world. You can sell. You can run a business out of your home because of eBay. You can meet people because of what you. Wow, like the world was changing, and I was like, I'm going to go be a part of it, which you would have never done if you were still living in New York now. Sure, it's got some tech companies, but
no, they'd laugh. They would laugh at you like you're ridiculous.
You leave, and you probably would be to leave your $1 million a year Wall Street job for your back then you were kind of working for free because the venture capital wasn't where it is now.
Yeah,
but it was great. It's a creative, and there's now a path. Where people work at Deloitte and they become like the CFO, or they become the law firm partners now regular, become the chief legal counsel, general counsel at these tech firms. So, but the whole world opened up and it was like, oh shit, well I'm standing here. This is great.
So the first one was NetRead.
Yeah.
So tell me about NetRead. Talk about NetRead.
Still around. NetRead was my company, a friend of mine who'd worked in the book publishing industry. There was a problem emerged, which was that as Amazon emerged, and there were multiple online booksellers. Amazon wasn't the first. Powell's was actually the first. But there were lots of them. There was Barnes & Noble. The data that used to be contained on the cover of a book was no longer being transmitted on the cover of the book because you didn't get the book cover when you were on Amazon. And so all that data, they call it the metadata, the number of pages, the author, and all of that, had to get to the publisher. So the publishing houses would have that data in one format, and they would want to take it to get it to Amazon, which had whatever format they did, and we just built the pipes that connected those two things. So you could give us your metadata about your books, that database file, and we would distribute that data in the appropriate format to every online store in the world, which turns out it was like a kind of a big problem, but not a very expensive problem. Like you could also solve this problem by hiring some, shitty low-level person. I'm sure the person would be great, but the skill set wasn't that big, and and solve it. Like it wasn't a $1 billion thing.
Yeah.
And that company's still around actually, and still operating, and just smaller than what we had expected. So it was a crazy time, and then it kind of ended for a while.
So were you then laid off in that read? It just grew too fast, or a typical ran out
of money? 2000, then September 11th, 2001. I was like, okay.
So knowing what you do now, knowing that you've done fundraising before, looking back on it, did you understand how series went and how fundraising went and how that all fell apart?
And we raised money, but we didn't know anybody. Now I know people. And they give you money if you have a good idea. And I was we didn't know anything. We hadn't done it. So no, we didn't know any of that. We raised money, but I think we raised money on the edge of the bubble more than because we knew people or we were particularly talented. But at some point, it's just doing it. It's just I saw there's an interview with Louis C.K. just did an interview on Charlie Rose, and Charlie Rose was asking him some question like ridiculous. Why are you so funny? Louis C.K. was just like, oh, for God's sake. He didn't say that, but he was, and so what he basically says, I've done this 1,000 times. I get up on stage and I do it and I do it and I do it, and you just get better. You do anything 1,000 times and you get better. Yeah. And it was kind of like that with working, the fundraising mistakes you make and the kind of lies you tell yourself when you're, starting your first company. You're like, hey, we got a 50-50 shot of this being the next Google. It's it's not exactly how those stats work. So, but if you do it after a while and you just get better at it, it's a skill like anything else.
So NetRead slows down. Yeah. You find yourself out of work.
Yeah.
Where do you pick up? So
mushed, and if there's a lesson here, it's just pick up a broom and do something. I did a couple .com nothing that went anywhere. One worked at a little video codec company, whatever the hell those things are, and did a company that was we were kind of onto something. It was the early concept of a callback thing in a call center. You call and you're like, hey, no one's available right now, and you can wait, but if you just put your number in, we'll call you back. And that didn't go anywhere. And then I met Jonathan Abrams, who founded the social network. Friendster founded social networking, in fact. And just started helping him. He was doing this thing, and it was working, the thing he was doing.
So you hadn't known him before? This is a new...
him. Yeah, I went to some event, and I just met him through our lawyer. I went to the same lawyer. And I would sit down with him, and he was had this thing, Friendster, and the numbers were just kind of... Every time I met with him, he'd say, hey, it was great. I was just looking at the database. It was 50 people on the site right now. And then I'd meet with him a week later. It's 400 people on the site right now. And I could... That number keeps changing. And it was also one of those things too, where when I got on, I'm like, that's how that's going to work, right?
You saw it.
You just got it. You were just like, oh shit, that guy and that guy, and you're like, wait, I just wasted 2 hours. This was before there were feeds, so I just wasted 2 hours crawling across profiles. But this is pretty cool. But then rather than saying, hey, I want a job, I want all this, he just had stuff he needed doing, like filing a patent and getting some paper, just stuff, whatever.
I'll help you out. You were just kind of helping him out.
Helping him out. And then all of a sudden, it was a thing. And he's like, well, I kind of, now I don't know who the fuck I trust because everybody's my buddy now. But this thing's working. He's like, do you want to come work with me? I was like, yeah, this is great. And then so all of a sudden, we're in this Friends went through a meteoric rise, and investment comes in from Kleiner Perkins and Benchmark, and a whole bunch of things go on. And there was a job then. Once at that point, I probably couldn't have interviewed there and gotten a job. Kind of not that I'm that guy, but the WhatsApp guy who interviewed at Facebook couldn't get a job and then sold his company to them for $20 billion. It was like that. So yeah, it was, it was great. It didn't work out the way it probably should have, but
So at Friendster, what was your role then? What were you doing?
I started as kind of CFO, which really means Chief Administrative Officer, do all that kind of stuff. And then over time, I would just take on, we'd have somebody screwing something up, like a customer service thing, and I would just take it on and do it. And then eventually I was operating everything that wasn't engineering, and that's a Chief Operating Officer. And then, and this is a classic thing that happens, the CFO gets to know the board. And the CEO moved on. We went through a series of CEO changes. And eventually they were, well, do you want to step up and be the CEO? I was like, oh, okay.
So what happened to Jonathan?
It's kind of complicated, but VCs just can't help themselves, and they're like, "Oh no, we got to get a different guy."
So it was just changing of the guard, is all it really was.
Yeah, I mean, well, it shouldn't have been.
Additional politics were involved, but
yeah, it was a political thing, and it was actually the lesson was heeded by Mark Zuckerberg. Sean Parker was an advisor to us. Sean Parker, who's later become Facebook's president for a couple minutes. He went to Mark Zuckerberg and said, "Look what happened over at Friendster. That guy got kicked out. Structure your shit here so you cannot be fired." And Mark Zuckerberg did, to Facebook's enormous benefit. It would appear. And he's in complete control of that. And I did a podcast earlier with Michael White about that, like how you retain control. And someday I'll hopefully have Jonathan on and talk about why you should retain control. But Andreessen Horowitz today, the big famous firm, one of their principal tenets is they really do not want to replace the
founder.
CEO. Yeah, exactly. The founder of their company. Yeah. Now, it's different. Consumer internet, you probably want to keep the visionary around. It's a little different sometimes for enterprise companies, because enterprise companies often get to a point where you're like, you have a product that people like. Now we need a guy who's a woman who's a global salesperson. And that's just a different skill set. Like you need it. But in any case.
So for our listeners that don't know Friendster, maybe talk about it a little bit, and then maybe contrast it with what Facebook did, what you did, what you didn't do. Where's the delta there? Like how
Pretty
did
much
that?
Same thing. Like Friendster was the first social network. It took off. It took off in 2003 when nothing was going on. It was nuclear winter in Silicon Valley. It was over. The internet was over. Everything that could have been invented and thought of had been thought of. Is literally what people were saying.
Yeah.
And Friendster came along and invented social networking. And for enough reasons, for reasons that I don't even know. It's like probably an 8-hour podcast, but we couldn't keep the thing run. Like the engineers we hired somehow could not keep the site running. Like for years, like for multiple years, like we couldn't get the page load times down to anything.
So it was traffic, too much traffic.
Yeah, it was too much traffic, but that shouldn't have been an excuse. Like I don't know what the hell happened, but like we just went multiple years where the site performance just sucked, and Facebook came along, and which is why Friendster is not an example of anything.
Okay,
like Friendster just should have kept the performance up. And would have been Facebook. And Facebook just took advantage of that. And they had structural advantages, and they started with colleges, and each college was a server. And, but there was just no excuse. Like it was just a screw up on the part.
So that's kind of the singularity, like the singular thing that you would look at reflecting back was the performance of the site.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
if you were to ask the people who had adopted that platform at the time, though, would they say the same thing? Would they say, "Man, it was like slow"?
Yeah. And I mean, eventually, you put up with it for a while because it's a hot club, right? Oh, it's slow because it's popular. Yeah. But then after a while, people start going to Facebook. Like, these pages are loading quick. It takes its toll. But there's nothing about Friendster. We filed the patents on the feed, the friend feed. Facebook bought them eventually.
Okay.
There was nothing that Facebook did that wasn't squarely on the Friendster roadmap. I mean, maybe the developer platform, but there
was just logical kind of steps.
Absolutely,
it seemed to just all fall into place.
Yeah, one after another, and Facebook just kind of did it. They had the advantage of being able to watch us and learn. Like, oh shit, that doesn't work. Okay, we'll do the right. We'll figure it out from here. But that was essentially it.
So how much would you attribute to kind of two factors then? Would for Facebook the academic origins of it.
Yeah.
The fact that you flip a switch and you have an entire student body on the platform.
Yeah.
That was probably in itself, because you have this like homogenous collective body.
Yeah.
Not incestuous, but like who wouldn't want to know what everyone else is up to?
Yeah, but that's true. Absolutely. That was happening on Friendster too. Like they could have done it on Friendster, but I think that was half a great idea. Because that doesn't work that way anymore.
Right. Well, remember in the early days it was like you have to have a .edu.
Yeah.
Right.
But they did now it doesn't work that way. So that was kind of almost a marketing thing too. Because they would go to a school and the board would get out, and it would be within like 2 days, 80% of the campus would be signed up. It was great.
Yeah.
And then later they got they made the decision to open it up to the world, and to their enormous benefit. Like Friendster screwed up. Like Facebook did all the right things, and Friendster helped them out by screwing up. I mean,
don't be hard on yourself, man. You're too hard on yourself.
Yeah, and I did my part fine. It just doesn't hey, the books are perfect though. Like,
right.
the HR was really well run. Our benefits are great.
So did you have an IPO?
No, it got sold eventually to a Malaysian company. It's still around.
Yeah.
The Malaysian company is. Friendster was morphed into something else. But yeah.
So it's what was the financial kind of unwinding of the whole thing? Was it the money stopped coming? Was it not monetized? Were you not able to monetize the platform?
Then I arguably we turned it around as much as we could. Performance got to be really good. It ended up that we were big in Southeast Asia. The thesis had been for a long time that there would be multiple social networks. That Bebo would be the European one. That there still is Odnoklassniki in Russia. Facebook just became dominant, and there became a point where it's like, look, Facebook has 1,500 people on staff. We've got 100. Like, it doesn't matter if our guys are twice as good. Like, they've got 10 times as many.
Yeah,
and it just became inevitable.
Yeah.
And then from that point, there was really nothing you could do, and we just sold it to the company. And, it was a better outcome than 99% of all other outcomes, but because it didn't go out of business. And,
right.
Sold for $150 million or whatever. It just wasn't $1 billion. It wasn't $10 billion. It wasn't $100 billion.
So how did, I've always wondered this as well.
Yeah.
What was the monetization of that platform? And Facebook at the time, there was no monetization of that either. They're running on numbers.
Yeah, it was
but being, someone from an infrastructure background as I have, bandwidth costs money, servers cost money, cooling, data centers.
Yeah.
Where is that? It's all negative cash flow. It's all out.
It was the advertising.
Okay.
I don't think we got the two lines to cross, to get the revenue to cross the expense, but it was advertising was doing it. The trick.
So the little, the page, not the pop-ups, but the...
and at the time, and we had graphical units. If you look at something like... Well, we had a graphical ad unit. So, if Spider-Man was coming out on the weekend, they wanted to spend a few $100,000 to have their ad on your site. So, it wasn't a revenue model problem, as Facebook has shown. Plenty of money on the ads. It was just that early performance stuff that we just never we never recovered from, essentially.
Yeah. So did Friendster help you get that fundraising bug in a way? Did it help you? Well, was that when you got your feet wet with fundraising?
Well, in a sense, it's when I met everybody.
Okay.
So now I know everybody, and kind of went through kind of the shit of rebuilding a company and all that. So a bunch of people got to know me, I guess for a specific kind of internet company, an international, complex consumer internet company, you're pretty good at running those. And okay, now we know that.
Yeah.
We'll keep you in mind. We'll invest in you again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so did that then? So after Friendster, where'd you find yourself?
So then I started a company called PlacePop with the backing of a guy named Michael Birch, a couple other guys, James Currier, Sanchinowski, and Chris Michael. And that company, it just didn't make it. We went through. It was in the check-in time. Check-ins were big, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. We never got product market fit. It was never, the app was designed. It went through several phases. It was kind of a mobile loyalty card app, but just never got the adoption. It was local. It was hard, and we worked as hard as we could. But eventually, the investors just said to us, "Hey, we're not mad. You can let it go.
Yeah,
we invest. We get it. You could have taken over the world. You didn't. It's okay. Let it go."
Who won in that space? Did anyone win in that space?
Foursquare is the guys, and I don't know.
They're still,
they're still there, but
they might have had their chance because wasn't there a they had their shot with Facebook, right? And they declined, right?
They've raised a ton of money. They've just changed their strategy.
Yeah,
or they announced they're going to have two apps now. One that's Swarm, which is you can see which of your friends are nearby, which exists on Facebook, by the way. So I don't know. Dennis Crowley is, by all accounts, a great guy. He's their CEO. And I wish them the best, but they're in that phase where I don't know anybody using them, and so now you got to figure out what your plan B is, and
Well, the whole check-in thing might be slightly dubious. Maybe that's kind of what the market is saying.
Facebook has deprecated it to it's there. It's one of the things you can do in your feed, but I think the check-in, I think it was cool. Holy crap, you know where I am? That's this place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but then there's this ironic twist of the NSA already knows where you are.
That's why we don't back anything up at work, because we'll just use their copy if something goes wrong.
So where's the outrage? Not to get off on a tangent, but we have this social media sharing this proliferation of social media.
Yeah.
Here's what I ate for breakfast. Here's where I am today.
Yeah.
Here's what I bought at the store.
Yeah.
Here's what my kid did.
Yeah.
How dare you track me?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand that outrage.
The funny thing about people being tracked is that the whole joke of it is that like people are outraged because they want to think someone cares. Like you wish the NSA cared what you were. They don't care that you like yoga. Like they really, like they shouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Right.
But they don't actually care about you.
No. And then, again, being a technology person myself, I've watched people surf the internet. So I know what those logs look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
You click once.
Yeah.
Pages and pages of logs are generated.
Yeah.
You have to sift. I'm sure there's programs that'll do this, right?
Yeah.
Echelon and all these other programs. But if, as a layman, to let everyone know out there, when you look at my email, thousands and thousands of pages of gets and image loadings and frames, all these things are just, it's nonsensical. It's a massive amount of data that you'd have to sift through just to watch what they're doing on the internet.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
literally.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not a simple process.
I think that's your biggest offense, against being snooped on, is just not being that interesting. Basically,
exactly. Yeah,
right. Like, don't build a bomb in your house. Actually, like like even if that is your legitimate hobby, like find another one, and like you're probably going to be okay.
So, Place Bob finds its end.
Yeah,
and this was what year then?
This was like 4 years ago, something like that.
Okay. So what came next?
Well, so then it was pretty quick. So then a friend of mine, I'd been at Deloitte, run these international companies. A friend of mine started a company building an international technology consulting firm for Digital Garage, which was a big Japanese company. And I did that for a couple of years. We built a 150 person, whatever it was, company that was doing Ruby on Rails software language consulting with offices all over the world, Asia, South America, Europe. And it was like a quick year of sort of traveling all over the place, and it was pretty cool. The company's there. It's called Neo. It's built. It exists. It's doing all right.
That's a much more kind of pragmatic approach. I mean, you're consulting
very straightforward.
with
people pay us. We pay people to work for us. It's a good place to work. We deliver code. It's lovely business.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't really, but I realized that running a professional services firm, I missed being in a consumer internet company. And then Jonathan Abrams, the Friendster founder, separately had started a company, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I've got that thing's happening where people like what we're doing. Not to the extent of Friendster, but they like what we're doing, and I think we can make something happen here. Do you want to come back and join me and make this one a success?" So I joined him at his new company,
which is
it's called Nuzzle, N-U-Z-Z-E-L, and it's a social news site, and it does something really simple, which is you log in with Facebook or Twitter, and it gives you the news based on what your friends are sharing the most. And the analogy for that would be back when Yahoo had their kind of search, they're trying to organize the internet. They had a bunch of categories. They had editors, and Google came along and said, why don't we just see which sites have the most other sites pointing to them? Those are probably the most important sites. In fact, we don't even know what's in these sites, but other sites seem to think they're important. And that's all we do with the news. We're like, look, we don't know why this tweet is important, but we do know it's news. It's not a photo. It's not a cat video, whatever. It's a piece of news. And your friends seem to be tweeting it. And it's in Spanish. We don't even know what the hell it is. But for some reason, they all think it's important. And it just turns out that that's a magical experience for people. Magic, and they're like, this news is perfect. I don't know how you knew this.
Well, that's an interesting point you just made. I didn't realize the language becomes kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's international
or
because
even the news. Like I looked at the feed of somebody who's in the internet security business. I couldn't understand what any of the articles were. They were in English, but it was like, SSL 47.2 layer breached. I was like, I literally didn't understand. So it puts you in the center of your own little news world, and it works for people, and thousands of people, not millions yet, but thousands were addicted to it. And that never happens. So once you get there, you're like, okay, now we have product market fit. People like the product. Mm-hmm. Now let's, start working with this thing. And it takes these companies, years to. I mean, Twitter did not take off overnight. It was years, and then all of a sudden, boom, off it goes.
So what year are you in now at Nuzzle over there?
It's been about a year and a half, something like that. I mean, the time's a little strange because Jonathan spent the first the first like 6 or 7 months or year, like kind of just building the prototype while he was like starting another thing called the Founders Den, which is where we are, starting a family. So he was he didn't raise money until he had a product that people were using. Mm-hmm. Like, he gave it to his friends, like, would you use this? Like, tell me. Like, I don't care if not. Like, and they were like, yeah, we'll use that. That's awesome. And so then he raised the money and then.
So your role over there is operations, right?
Well, chief operating officer, but there's 4 people. So, it's like the joke, like how many people in your band, like 3 musicians and a drummer. I'm the drummer. Basically. So yes, it is chief operating officer. I just do everything that needs to be done that's not coding.
But now you have a primary role of or at least a large role of fundraising at this point, right?
Yeah, that's almost done now. I mean, that's a lot of logistics. But yeah, we've raised a few $1 million over the past couple weeks actually. So and so that'll give us time to execute and make this vision happen.
So you go through these phases as someone who might not understand kind of how fundraising works, like myself generally. Yeah. So you go through these phases. At some point, you have to stop and actually do something, right? You have to say, okay, we've got what we need to operate for X number of months or years, and then you execute. Yeah. And so are you in this? You're in this execution phase?
We're on the brink of it. Yeah, we'll just execute the crap out of it. It's going to be great. Like, if you haven't tried Nuzzle, try it. It's pretty easy. You just sign up with Facebook or Twitter. It either gives you the best news you've ever seen or it doesn't. It's pretty straightforward. It's great. Like, we're pretty excited about it. Like, it's and the news industry is so in turmoil right now, which is where you want to be, right? Like, that's where Google comes from. That's where Facebook comes from. Like, you come from turmoil. Like, you don't come from, like, right now it's probably you probably don't want to start a search engine right now. Like, that's pretty locked up. Like, social networking's pretty locked up. Yeah. News is not locked up. It's crazy. So, yeah.
News outlets are just enormous and continuing to kind of splinter, but then they also come together. Like, it's hard.
They're getting killed. Like, the primary content creators are getting killed by the bloggers because the bloggers are just taking their content, the comment, spitting it on Twitter or Facebook, and the primary sources get that temporary bump. Oh, you're getting traffic from Facebook. It's great. But the source of the financing to keep the bureau in Cairo and London and all that it's not clear. It's not clear how that's going to work. Or if the blog companies become big enough themselves that they can fund the primary research. It's interesting. Like, the news business it's fascinating. Yeah. But the good news is a website. They make more of it every single day of the year. So, like, people don't, like, we send people a daily email if they want. Mm-hmm. Nobody unsubscribes from it. Like, you couldn't send people a daily email on anything else except the news. We're like, oh, yeah. Like, people are used to getting newspapers every day. Like, that's a thing.
You have this kind of just content that's generating itself.
Yeah, the gift that keeps giving.
Right, like, which is news.
Yeah. So it's a pretty good space.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're like, we like it.
And so then here we are at this podcast. Yeah. So what brought you to the podcast?
Yeah. So here. So I listen to podcasts, and I listen to the Los Angeles podcast, like entertainment industry podcast. Mark Maron's fabulous, and I listen to Silicon Valley podcasts. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'll use Mark Maron as an example. His podcast, like, yes, he's a comedian, so he's a trained entertainer. Yeah. But he interviews people, and it's, like, interesting, and it's touching, and it's, like, poignant, and
it's human.
And
it's
funny.
Human. Yeah.
And then I listen to Silicon Valley podcast, and it's like, Jesus Christ. I literally, like, got mad. And I was like, it's guys. Okay. They talk, like, they hate Microsoft. Like, couldn't care less. They have opinions about Google Glass. Like, okay, it turns out I could care less because there's Google Glass. Like, so just when you thought, like, I literally couldn't care less about any topic, like weather balloons in Kenya, maybe. But I mean, that sounds interesting now that I say it, right? Like,
like weather balloons in Kenya. Right. That sounds kind of cool. Yeah.
And then it's like, so there's that, and then there's the like that guy's stupid, right? Like, Facebook, stupid to pay that much money for like Snapchat. And listen, like, okay, so you have a podcast, and the people at Facebook, like, built Facebook. So your thesis is that you've got it figured out.
Right.
Those idiots, because they don't have their own podcast, like, as opposed to, like, the obvious thing, which is like, that seems like a lot of money. I wonder why the people at Facebook would do that.
Dissect that. Yeah, so be real about it.
Yeah, so I'm listening to these shitty Silicon Valley podcasts. Yeah. And then having conversations with people who I think are very interesting. I'm like, well, I can't really sing or dance or play guitar. I can talk. Like, I do that every day. So why don't we do a podcast and just try to be fucking interesting and, not talk about boring shit. And so talked about like racism in Silicon Valley last week, sexism, watched the show Silicon Valley, made fun of hipsters. I mean, I don't know. It's a journey, but it came from me just listening to these Mark Maron, these LA podcasts that were fantastic, and listening to Silicon Valley podcasts where I was like, you guys are like, this is terrible fucking radio. And it's not because I don't understand what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. It's terrible radio. I'm just around a podcast. And it turns out you can do that. By the way, thank you for helping me do that.
Damn, it's a pleasure to be a part of this. It's a joy. Yeah. This is fun. It's fun stuff here.
Yeah, and so it's a journey. It is. I don't know. I'm going to LA tomorrow. I'm going to talk to a guy about LA versus San Francisco web shows versus produced cable shows. I'm like, that's interesting. Like, I want to learn about that thing.
Absolutely.
And then there's way more funny freaking people in Silicon Valley than you would think from listening to these podcasts. Like, people come on, they're like kind of funny and they're interesting, and they, did other shit before they came here. That's like interesting stuff. So that's where the podcast came from.
That's great. So what do you think's next? What's other than 1,000 podcasts from now?
Yeah. I don't know. It's already been, to be really self-indulgent, it's been really freaking interesting. Like, it's a Rorschach test when you go to your friends or people and you're like, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? And they'll say like, I have nothing to say. You're like, what? Well, first of all, that's your fucking worldview of yourself? Like, you have nothing to say? Right. And then generally they're like, well, yeah, I don't know. Like, sexism in Silicon Valley, and this just happened. You're like, that's like 10 times more interesting than anything else. Like, whatever. Yeah. So it's just kind of a journey. Like, I think I'm going to do at least 100 of them. I've already done 10. Well, we'll already have done 10 in a couple minutes. And, the more I talk to people just open up like, oh, I know a guy you got to talk to. Like, this guy did this thing. And you're like, wow, that guy did that. And Mark Maron's never going to interview these people. Like, they're up here. Down there.
The irony is this is the true social network.
Where the literal and the actual meaning diverge.
This is the literal of social network right here. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. This is what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not poking each other. It's not sharing pictures. It's talking to people. It's being human. It's being real.
Yeah. And I think, people are... It's just interesting having people on, the few people I've had, and watching them kind of open up and kind of just, like, oh, yeah, like, there's way more to you. And that's happened to me on Mark Maron a lot of times, where I listen to him, I'm like, oh, that guy on How I Met Your Mother, like, whatever, some dude. And then he's like, wow, that's crazy. He does that, and the other thing. So, learning about people has just been, in the earliest days has been pretty interesting. And then... like, the news is the gift that just keeps giving. Like, there's been this whole thing where New York just kind of pervs on San Francisco. Right. Yeah. Every week. It's like, oh, come on, this is too easy. Like, which will be interesting, too, talking to the guys in LA, because LA doesn't give a crap about San Francisco. LA Times isn't writing about San Francisco every week, but New York is like...
all over it.
Yeah. Yep. A bus was stopped in San Francisco this week. All is quiet in New York. So that's the podcast story. And I appreciate your help and being on this journey with me.
I'm happy to be a part of it, and I wish you many more. And I know there will be.
Yeah, well,
there's lots of interesting people out there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure.
Do you want to wrap it up? Do you want to say, like, this has been the Something Ventured podcast?
This has been the Something Ventured podcast with your alternate guest, Eric Hall.
That's fantastic. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.